Hello and welcome to the 17th episode of the Paralyzed podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Krantz, where some people know me on the internet, Brandon Durdens, whatever. In this episode, I talked to Joey Sturgis, who, as many of you probably know, is a pretty well-known producer who created a lot of the records that, if you listen to metalcore, post-hardcore, anything in like the Warped Tour scene with breakdown, screaming, electronic influence in the background, whether it was Asking Alexandria, We Came as Romans, Of Mice and Men. The list goes on and on. Made one of my favorite Color Morale records, Conquer Divide, a bunch of different records that we get into a little bit in this. You will definitely know who this is. It was great to talk with him. We talked a bit about a lesser-known music project at the very beginning that he made called the Korean Lighthouse, which is his solo project he made about a decade ago. I own the EP. It's absolutely fantastic. If you have not listened to it before, check out the Korean Lighthouse. I believe it's at least on Apple Music and iTunes. I don't know if it's even on Spotify for streaming services, but it was a great EP. I was very surprised when I first heard it about a decade ago at how good Joey is at singing and writing his own music. We get into why he hasn't made that many of his own releases and where that kind of stems from. We talk about some of the different bands, kind of his eye-opening moment on his impact in the music scene. We talk about his branch from doing production, mixing, and mastering to what he does a lot more now, which is things like the urm.academy with A.L. Levy, doing Nail the Mix, doing the Joey Sturgis tones, doing a whole host of things that he does for kind of the marketing side, for the production of plugins, for helping people, and why he chose to kind of do this URM Academy to really help up-and-coming producers that might not have the traditional educational knowledge that a lot of other people have had the opportunity to get, and why this might be more beneficial than going to maybe a college or university for music production. We get into a whole host of things. It was great to talk to Joey. I was a little nervous before we did this because he is such a big name in the kind of music industry that I am really interested in. But he was such a nice person to talk to. Very, very grounded, very, very articulate in what he was talking about. And I just kind of let him go with the few questions that I asked him for this hour that we had together. So I really appreciate that Joey came on with me. Again, if you like this episode, make sure to go back and listen to a few other ones that we've had. We talked both music and social issues and politics on this podcast. I did an episode with Garrett Russell, who's big in the metalcore scene. Obviously, we talked a lot about his kind of venture into music, what got him into the world issues he talks about a lot, and all those different things. So if you're into the music that Joey made with a lot of the bands that you love, you'll probably like that one as well. Talk to, maybe lesser known bands that you would like, whether it would be a metal band like Whole Heart from Grand Rapids, Michigan, whether it would be Guardrail, which was the last episode I put out with Kevin Andrew, who's more of a punk rock, pop punk band, and a whole sort of other episodes that we've done, as well as some political ones if you're into that as well, whether it's a political commentator. I had Mac on, good politic guy, who's kind of an up-and-coming kind of bigger name that's coming out from the political commentary sphere. Talk to a political advocate like my good friend Shabir Rizvi. We've had a couple episodes both talking about just his upbringing into politics, as well as a venture that he did into Iran, which was a really interesting episode if you want to kind of hear about the world issue side of things. But this episode is a music-based episode. I was super stoked to do it. And before we get into it, I just wanted to talk again. I just mentioned them a little bit earlier about the band Whole Heart from Grand Rapids, Michigan. If you want to hear a lot about this band, I talked to Alec Hawkins, who's a good friend of mine and the guitar player in the band. Also writes a decent amount of the lyrics for some of the releases. This band is, again, from Michigan, an up-and-coming band from the area. I don't know how they're not bigger than they are. We talked a lot about their latest EP, Dreams That Die With You, which was my number one EP from last year. So if you have not checked that out, make sure to check that out. They talk kind of in a micro level about death and dying and kind of the process behind this, and kind of a concept EP, which is really cool for a release from a kind of up-and-coming local, mostly established band. The guitar riffs are insane. The vocals are incredible. Their vocalist Major knocks it out of the park with his screams and his shouts, and it really conveys the emotion of the music. And of course, the production is done in-house by the band. They produce, mix, and master all of their own material. Kai, their bass player, did such a good job. I was blown away to learn that they did all of this in-house. So again, if you have not checked this band out before, both check out the band Whole Heart. They're wholeheart_US on social media. Check them out on Spotify. Again, their newest EP is Dreams That Die With You. Should be seeing some new music soon. Hopefully I'll get to talk to Alec and some of the other members of the band about that soon. But in the meantime, here's a little clip from one of my favorite songs from the band before we get into the episode with Joey Sturgis, called Flux, from, again, the EP Dreams That Die With You on the Powerless podcast. Right after this, we'll get into the episode, but check it out.
Eternity, or will I find a way out, guilted and led by a personal doubt, searching to find my inner peace, or the path of redemption, but what awaits me? Is there an end?
All right, I am here with Joey Sturgis, who is a record producer. There's a lot of different things we could list, everything from a composer to mastering engineer, mixing engineer, also the owner of urm.academy, Joey Sturgis Tones. I'm sure I'm missing something else in there as well. A lot of things to cover. How are you doing today, bud?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with me. I've obviously been a fan of your work in a lot of different aspects for a long time, whether it comes to, producing some bands I've listened to for well over a decade now, or the different things I've been able to see from you on things like what your company's done with like Nail the Mix. Obviously the plugins you've made that for people like me that can't necessarily afford the top tier, physical versions of a lot of things, or some of those more expensive plugins, you've really found a way to make a lot of those things really accessible for people. Actually, with this recording right here, I use the Howard Benson vocal plugin on the podcast. So a lot I want to cover with you before we get into kind of where you got started as a producer, what got you into kind of heavier music and music in general, and wanting to create it and getting into engineering and producing and things of that nature. One thing I wanted to go over that I hadn't heard from you in maybe over a decade, and I even looked on your Wikipedia page and some different things that's not listed, is in 2013, I followed you on social media for a bit, and you actually put out an EP that I still have on my phone that I listen to from time to time under the name the Korean Lighthouse. Is that, I was looking through, is that the only solo release you've done? What was the thought process behind that, and why isn't there more than just that EP from that project?
Well, every once in a while I get like just enough inspired to like make my own music, which is kind of rare because when you work on music, you're just a part of so many projects. You're constantly using that creative energy on other songs. But every once in a while, something will just hit me a certain way and make me want to write a song. So that's kind of really what that EP reflects, is like a period of like 7 years of like, oh, I'll make a song, and then a year goes by, I'll make another song, and like I finally just put them into one collection and was like, here we go, we'll put this out and see what happens. Also, the second part of it is really like I'm just pretty shy about like singing, even though like I can sing pretty decent. I'm not really like, I don't have like frontman energy or anything like that. So
Right.
so it's kind of like weird for me to do it. But I felt like the songs were good enough to where I was like, yeah, this is cool. Like people will listen to this and I think it's good. And so put it out and that's it.
Yeah, I totally get that. Especially, I was looking through your entire catalog of all the records you worked on. Like you just said, I think some of your issues where you're trying to save that creative outlet, one, to to write music, but to write music in the vein of what assists other people, it would just be a burnout situation to try to also make all your music more consistently on the top of it. So that makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to ask about that because I really like the EP. If anybody listening to this isn't aware of it, definitely check it out. It's a really good listen. I like listening to it a lot on my commutes after a long day of work or something. And I don't know, it's a good kind of ambient, unique sounding record. So definitely check it out if you haven't already. So thanks for going over that. Before we kind of get into some of the things you're doing now with the URM Academy and your plugins and things of that nature, I just kind of want to go back a bit. I'm sure you've talked about this a couple different times before, but for anybody that doesn't know, this podcast, I like to go back and kind of see where people's origins were with music and what kind of got you in the passion for what is now your entire, your entire career, which is incredible, right? So kind of take me back. What first got you into music, and what got you into this idea of creating your own music or getting into production?
Well, it's funny because I kind of like tried to avoid it, like slightly intentionally in a way, like because my family is entirely musical. Everyone either sings or plays an instrument. Pretty much all of us, right? So for me, like music was sort of like a part of life. It wasn't really like, oh, I'm gonna go after this like as a career. So in my mind, like I never thought like, oh yeah, music will be my career. Like in my mind, I was like, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna learn how to program computers, and I'm gonna learn how to make video games and stuff like that. So I kind of like approached music as more of a just a part of life. But it started to become more than that when I was in this band and we were trying to find a way to like get on shows because we like for whatever reason we like couldn't figure out how to like get booked for shows. And so our idea was like, well, let's record a demo and then put it on MySpace, and then people could see what we sound like, and then once they know what we sound like, they might want to book us to play the show. So we do that. And at the time I had been messing around with recording. Like I kind of knew what I was doing, but at the same time, like I couldn't explain a compressor to you. Like, it's more just like, oh, I moved this knob and it makes it sound better, like kind of stuff.
Right.
So I'm doing this and I make a demo and it ends up sounding pretty cool. We put it on MySpace, and then like the what happened was that people just hit us up and was like, where did you guys record? We want to record there. So it's like we still didn't accomplish our goal. Like we're like, what are we doing wrong here, man? So then we were like, okay, well, if we record these bands, maybe while they're in the studio, we could like convince them to play a show with us. So we tried doing that for a little while, and it kind of just didn't. It fizzled out. The band couldn't keep a guitar player for long enough, and just kind of kept doing the recording thing because people liked it and people wanted to do it. Plus, I was making a little money doing that too.
Right.
And yeah, and then it just got to the point where it was like out of control. Like basically, I was renting this place from my friend, and then they wanted to use it for their practice, and then I had like a bunch of bands on my schedule, and I'm like, oh crap, like I gotta start a studio now, and I
Yeah.
out of nowhere. So I had called up my manager at the time, and I was like, hey man, we got a problem. I don't have a place to record anymore, and you got like 10 more bands coming to me, so we need to figure this out. And he's like, okay, well, how about I just buy you a house? You can pay me back over time like a mortgage, and then we can continue on. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy, because I didn't have credit
Yeah.
back then either. So thankfully, because of that opportunity, that kind of set the ball rolling for everything. But yeah, it,
That
it really was like basically an accident. Like I just kind of was in the studio messing around, and then one thing led to another, and I'm recording this band just because they're my friends, and then I'm recording their friends, and then on and on and on. So
Yeah, it's interesting to hear from you who, for me, I'm just a few years younger than you, but I first got into the kind of, I don't ever know what to call the specific genres, post-hardcore, metalcore, like from that era of like the mid 2000s. It's interesting to hear that you essentially started the way a lot of people I know started doing anything when it comes to music. It was just to find a way to get your band on bills, right? Like it's just so interesting that that's how something like this can start. But it really is the case. You mentioned the guitar player. You couldn't keep a guitar player in the band. I'm just curious, when you played in bands starting off before you got into this whole production and working with other bands, in the studio, what did you play in that band? Like what did you used to play when you were playing in music?
I've always assumed the drummer role for pretty much any band that I've been a part of. Like even when I was 9 years old, I was the drummer in this band of like 25-year-olds. It was hilarious. Like I'm this little 9-year-old on the drum set, barely able to reach the cymbals and the kick pedal and all this stuff. But I can play guitar. I just never did it in a band.
Right.
And you know how it is when you start a band and the band is sort of just a passion creative project. You've got your guitar player who works like 40, 50 hours a week at a factory, like can barely make practice, like stuff like that, that you deal with.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. That's just interesting. So I had always seen you work from a variety of different things. I wasn't aware that you kind of did drums early on in bands. That's interesting. Thanks for going over that. So kind of going from there, and you said, the manager you're working with helped you out with getting a house to start doing these records. When did it kind of start really exploding for you with the amount of records you had to kind of, because I've heard a bit before where you said you were literally having to juggle like when bands would come in and come out and different things of that nature. Um, at least according to a couple of websites I looked at, you're credited with over, this would probably include EPs, I'd imagine too, but you're credited with over 100 records when it comes to production or engineering or mastering, which is just, that blows my mind. That's like an insurmountable amount of music to work on. But when did that kind of start going full tilt for you? Was that before you got that house? I know early on you worked with like Devil Wears Prada, Before Their Eyes, things like that. Was that during that time? Was that a little before, or what was the trajectory there?
yeah, I mean, the way it kind of played out was I kind of became like the MySpace king in a sense, and MySpace was also responsible for like blowing up our scene, you know. So, and we could call that the metalcore scene just to make it
Yeah,
simple. But
right.
so basically, like you do one metalcore band and you do a good job, and then it goes on MySpace. Like the next day, everybody knows about it, and then the next day after that, everybody knows who did it or where it was recorded, right? And
Hmm.
so word traveled fast, and bands would want to basically work with me because they'd be like, oh, we're trying to be like that, or trying to play shows with that band, or trying to get on that band's level. And they're like, of course, part of that formula is going to be going to the same guy that records them or whatever. And also, I had the other thing that was working well for me was like I gave the band such a good experience in the studio that I felt like when they played shows together, they would probably talk about me like in a way that would basically self promote my
Right.
business. Like word of mouth marketing is the strongest marketing, right?
Hmm.
So I feel like those two things were working in tandem. And the breakout moment was when and this repeated many times. Like for example, I'd have a band like the Devil Wears Prada would come in, right? We do 5 songs that get signed. We do a first album that comes out. Then Asking Alexandria comes to America. We do 5 songs that get signed. We do an album. That album comes out. We Came as Romans drives down from Michigan. We do a 5 songs that get signed. Album comes out, and they go on tour. So this is like a ball just rolling down a hill, getting bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where now you have a band with like a $250,000 record budget for their second and third album kind of stuff going on. And none the wiser. I was just there like, all right, like, let's go. Let's make another album. Let's try to make it sound better. Let's try to make it even crazier. Let's take it to the next level. And that got hard like after a while because when you work with a band like 3 or 4 times in a row, you're like, I don't really know where to go next with this.
Right.
So that was the challenge after everything started to explode.
Yeah, I could imagine, you referenced a few of the bands that I had I had kind of put down a list, not with all of them because I'd have to scroll down an entire sheet of paper, right? But working with Devil Wears Prada, Asking Alexandria, you did the first couple of Mice and Men records when those kind of really blew up. One of the bands close to where I'm from that everybody loved the record that you did with them, From the Color Morale. Um, Even one of my favorite kind of local Chicago bands that isn't around anymore, but Rosalind, they did a record with you,
Yeah, I
Constant
remember that.
North, that I absolutely loved. And so, yeah, I guess that was, you kind of led into a question I was going to ask anyway. But when you're working, and of course, all these bands are different. They don't, just because you're in a genre doesn't mean that everything's exactly the same. But when you were working with so many different bands at such a consecutive time frame in relatively the same styles, um, was there an approach you had to do with like influence? Was there kind of a structure you'd go to with these sort of bands to where you were able to work with bands with similar sounds and yet make them have their own unique textures or blends or of the sounds kind of right out of the gate with a lot of their debut records? So I know this is kind of a general heady question, but was there something, or is there something you still do when you're working on music that kind of helps you keep that in mind to not just make a good sounding record, but a unique record as well?
Yeah, so I've always looked at my process or I guess my magic touch or whatever you want to call that as like a magnifying glass. or even maybe a better way to put it is like steroids. Like I go into what the artist already has given me, what they're starting with, and I try to find ways to like enhance it, make it bigger, more of the more of the more, if that makes any sense. Like
Mhm.
I wasn't so much of a producer that wanted to go in and change everything. I didn't want to say, yo, I did this. I did say verses are too long, intros are too long. Of course, you have a little bit of that, but I didn't want to be the guy that was like, you guys got to start over. You're terrible at writing songs. It was more like, let me find a way to take what you did and like make it work, but also enhance it and make it huge and make it like the superhero version of whatever you are, without changing your DNA. And I think that worked really well for a long time. It got to the point where, these bands started to want to create music that they themselves didn't know how to create. So they started to go to co-writers or whatever that, however that looks. And that's really just not me. I've always just been sort of the, show me your painting and I'll make it brighter or whatever, for a metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When when it comes to, because obviously you've worked with so many different bands, like I mentioned before. When it comes to that kind of songwriting aspect, you said right here, you just kind of, if anything, you take some parts that are a little too long, a little too repetitive, might whittle them down to where a song that they bring that's 5 minutes might be able to get down to 3.5 or something like that, right? But did you ever find with some of these records, you wouldn't have to name drop or anything, that you were able to, were there times that you had to go more of the songwriting route with any bands, to where, some bands, depending upon who they are, they come in records 95% written, the other one, they might come in with 3 songs. And do you prefer that, where you get to work on the songwriting aspect a little more, or do you prefer more of, like you just said, getting to enhance, kind of put some extra strokes of I was trying to get back to the metaphor there, I ruined that, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Just between those two things, is there a preference, or do you just really care about what the artist needs?
Yeah, so any and all of the above happen. You have albums that come in that are like almost basically like a 95% work of art. Actually, I just finished one that was like that, where it was like every song was just incredible, to the point where I was like, did we miss that harmony? Because you put a harmony in your demo, and we need to make sure that we put that in there. That kind of stuff. But then
Right.
you also get records where they come in with 3 songs done, 4 half-ass, well, half finished ideas. Half-ass ideas is how I would call it in the studio.
Yeah.
um, and you have no choice. I mean, you have to get it done, because a lot of the times I would be paid in advance. So it's like, we got to make this happen, guys. And we got 30 days. Let's go. I don't like those scenarios. Now, I will say that sometimes you get this, for lack of a better phrase, performance anxiety kind of thing, where like, you're up against a deadline and you have to make something great. So you end up, that's exactly what ends up happening. And that's kind of like what some of the Mice and Men records were. It's just like us sitting there, like we were all, I remember this vividly because the air conditioner broke. So we're all like literally
Oh
in
God.
shorts with all of our shirts off. We got a fan blowing like crazy. You got 2 or 3 fans blowing in every direction in the studio. And we're just sitting there like, what about this riff? What about this riff? What about this riff? Passing guitar around until we finally are like, oh, that sounds good. Then we would record that riff, and then we'd be like, all right, what comes next? Like,
Yeah.
so I don't love those situations, but sometimes it can create like interesting art that you wouldn't have done if you had more time to think about it. And so that's kind
Right.
of cool. But what I prefer is definitely the scenario where somebody has sat on a body of work and thought about it and kind of went through it, and they're more comfortable in what they want to create. And I think I thrive in that scenario where I'm like, okay, so you made this demo and you love this song, but it's just not big enough. Like I can make it big, So that's what I like to apply myself and apply my skills.
Yeah, I mean, that would make a lot of sense to me too. That's how I would feel, just because of the stressors as well. I think there's a different level and different kind of stress there between, like, we got paid, we need to create the songs for a record, and I'm paid in advance. Let's take what you've got here and make it as good as it is in your head. That's what I think a great producer is, you know, a lot of, I can just speak from my own experience on a much more amateur level, but it's still the same idea where you would go to, you just go somewhere and like what you hope a producer can do is get something to sound as good as it actually is in your head. Cause God knows a lot of musicians, we don't have the ear that producers or engineers or anybody else that's working on the studio side of the record have. So when you can bring somebody in that not only understands the style of music, but understands like the mechanics and the kind of, you know, nuances in studio on how to bring that to life, like that's kind of what a producer's ideal role would be, right? As opposed to having to, like you said, pass around a guitar and write as many riffs as you can to hopefully get something good out of it and in studio in the moment, right?
Yeah.
So great, thanks for going over that. Before we get into the JST plugin stuff, one thing I just wanted to ask after looking at all these records, is kind of a cliche question, but with you, I think it's kind of good to go over. With all of these, are there like 2 or 3 out of the records you've worked on that were either, you don't have to say best, but most meaningful to you or important to you? Obviously, from growth, there's some obvious ones, but any ones that you loved working on the most, or there's aspects of it that you enjoyed doing more when it comes to ranking these things?
Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of the different records for a lot of different reasons. I mean, for example, working on like Oceano in 2008 was like a challenge for me because I had never really done like a proper death metal record before.
Right.
But I kind of understood like the mechanics of it, you know. I was always like in pursuit of perfection. You know, I tried to get these riffs to be huge, but to be like on time and on beat and accurate. I tried to get every single kick hit. You know, if you've got this part in the song where it's got like 16th note double bass and it goes for like 8 bars, like I'm like in there like making sure that it's the exact number of kicks that it's supposed to be. You know,
Right.
and I think that there were a lot of producers in that time period that really didn't approach it that way. You know, it was more just like I'll record the band as they perform it. I was like an additional layer between the artist and the listener of like perfection. You know, I would go in there and be
Mhm.
like making sure that the intent was actually presented the way that it was supposed to be presented. And so, you know, records like Reckless and Relentless is a famous one I always talk about because that time period was just so it was really where I had a stride, like I was in the zone, you know, and I was really coming up with crazy stuff that I think people haven't heard in that genre before.
Yeah.
And the band was really like kind of egging me on, you know. They were like, we love this stuff, we want more and more of that. And so I do like the records where I was given the sort of the stage to provide that kind of level of production. We Came as Romans is another one, like the first We Came as Romans record where there's like these, you know, 60-part orchestras like playing
Yeah.
over breakdowns and stuff, like very, very cool stuff. So I like to work on things that are really theatrical, cinematic, you know, things that sound almost like a Michael Bay movie or something, like, you know,
Yeah.
I think that's where I really kind of shine is sort of the Foley effects, the explosions, the just the craziness of it. And so records that allow me to do that on the songs are the ones that I gravitate towards being my favorite.
Mhm.
But then there's also records that like I feel like never got a chance, like the um it's a Before Their Eyes record. I think it's called, I want to
I've
say
got
it's
it.
called Untouchable. I can't remember the name of the record right now, but it has like a big heart on the front of it. And
Mhm.
like it's kind of a weird record because like half of it's like really heavy and then the other half of it is really poppy. And I think that they just at the time maybe didn't have the best team to figure out how to market it correctly. But that record is so good. And like there's co-writers on it and some of the songs are just incredible, like the messaging and the way that it sounds and all that. So yeah, I have some deep cuts, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. Because there's always that level of it where, you know, somebody could obviously say for the growth aspect of it, you'd say that, you know, some of the Asking Alexandria records, definitely the first one, right? Or, you know, the first 2 Prada records you worked on that I think like right after those came out, every metalcore band that was of younger kids, because I know because I was in high school what happened, every band all of a sudden wanted to sound exactly like those records, right? But there is just kind of the labors of love that regardless of their success, you just love how they turned out, even if everybody else didn't catch on to it, right? To talk about that Plant a Seed record that you're referencing, that I think was another one that's probably both, right? Where you got to, it was this exponentially massive record when it came out. I remember seeing them say, I'm from Illinois, and I saw We Came as Romans right before that album came out, and they were playing this little beaten down warehouse that like 40 people were at. That record comes out, the next time I see them come around to Chicago, they're not headlining, but they're playing at a like 3,000 cap venue like the very next time I see them. So those kinds of things are cool, both on a just personal labor of love record and also aspect, and also just like the idea that something you put out with this band sent them like through the moon as far as what their reach was and their trajectory as a band, right? That's got to be kind of a cool, fulfilling thing, that an aspect of some of these bands' careers is due to the work you did on their records, right?
Yeah, I mean, the hard part about it is that, you know, uh, uh, numbers on a screen kind of don't really translate to impact in the world. And what I mean by that is like, I had no idea how much of a, I'm getting goosebumps right now. I had no clue how much of a deal it was actually becoming in the real world, because I sat inside of a studio all day long making
Right.
records. So I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
out there at the shows. I didn't see how fans reacted to the music. And back then it was kind of rare to even, now you can just go on YouTube and you can find like a video of the concert that happened last night pretty much anywhere in the world, because
Right.
everybody's uploading it on YouTube. But back then that was rare. Like you couldn't even find a live video of the band. So I had like this all encompassing moment where, I go to South by So What, and Asking is headlining, and they play like, the songs that we had just finished. There's like 4,000 people there, and like the song starts and the intro plays, which is basically it has no band members in it. The intro is just all Joey Sturgis, right? And
Right.
the crowd's like going nuts, and I was just like, oh shit, man, this is like a thing. This is like, I'm actually making music that people are actually listening to, and that really made it all click. And when I went back home from that, I had like a whole different mindset. I was like, all right, I'm gonna take this thing to the next level. And so yeah, then right after that, like I got a bunch of really amazing opportunities, awesome records, got to move on to go work with Amur and Attila and some of the more heavier side of the genre.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so like I wish that there was more of a camera on all that, because I really didn't get to see it happen. But luckily, it all worked to my benefit, because I was also one
Right.
of the pioneers of social media, like in terms of using those services to actually shine a spotlight on myself. I was like, tweeting about my studio's experiences. I was uploading vlogs on YouTube in 2007. Like
Right.
all this kind of stuff, like basically compounded and exponentially grew my brand. And then it was really easy for me to just start a company and say, okay, I'm going to teach you how to produce, or I'm going to make plugins, like, because so many people were watching me and watching what I was doing, that it was just easy to basically start.
Yeah. Yeah. That I have wondered about that in the past with you, because it seems like whatever you're starting to work on, I'm not trying to like talk you up too much, but it's just how it goes. Like, every single time you've done something, whether it's online presence or like I've said before with the production on these songs, and kind of in a lot of ways making a new sound with a lot of bands in a lot of ways, that really exploded. Like you said, it's cool that you got to see that experience with Asking Alexandria. But is there something you can kind of attribute that to with your personality? Is it just that you kind of follow trends really well? Is it just like a gut thing? Like, where's that come from that you always seem to start doing these things a few years before everybody else catches on?
Well, uh, it really does go back to my core talent, which is basically problem solving. I feel like I'm an excellent problem solver, maybe even from an engineering kind of science point of view, if that makes sense. Like,
Mhm.
I've always sort of been great at figuring out how to make stuff work, or how to fix things, or like come up with solutions to, various scenarios. Even my first real job was, I was a computer tech. So I was, troubleshooting computers.
Mhm.
And then you think about programming in video games, you're just solving more problems. Like, how do I make the map load faster because it takes up too much memory or whatever, right? And then
Mhm.
you look at a song and it's like, okay, well, song's too long, so how do I make it shorter and still make it make sense? And then oh, the drummer's mad at the guitar player, so how do I get the two of them to work together better? And then oh, it's the vocal levels are all over the place. So how do I create a tool that automatically changes the dynamics, like a vocal compressor? So
Right.
everything, start a software company. Okay, how do I get like 10 people to work together on a marketing team? And it's just all problem solving to me. And I've always also focused on solutions. Like, there's some people who see a problem and the first thought is worry and stress, and they obsess over the problem itself, not the actual thing that would create the change that would solve the problem. I'm the opposite. I focus only on the solution. So if it's like there's a problem there, I just accept it. I'm like, okay, there is a problem. Not going to stress on that. I'm going to focus on what actions can I take to make this problem go away. And that mindset, I think, is what has helped me do everything that I do, which is make make records, make plugins, start companies, build companies, grow things, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. That's a healthier mindset that I think most of us have when it comes to frustrating issues, especially involving production or things like that. I know it can kind of be, when you're trying to figure those things out, can be mind-boggling to say the least. But yeah, having that mentality would definitely help out with those things. You've mentioned a few times, and I mentioned it at the beginning. Um, Joey Sturgis tones, which was the first thing I saw from you personally, outside of making records and things of that nature. Like I mentioned before, I personally used a few of these things myself. Absolutely love them. What got you to first kind of switch gears to doing that? I know that you focused on that and the URM Academy and all those different things a lot more than working with bands on actual production and mixing and mastering. If I am wrong, correct me. But what was kind of the shift there for you, and why decide to start doing these plugins?
So the story really starts all the way back in around 2000. I think it was like 2007 or so, 2008. Um, I was doing drums in a way that was a little ridiculous. The way that I would do it is I'd basically record drums for the whole album. Actually, the very, very, very first thing I would do is set up all the drums, get them all sounding the way I like, and then we would record drum samples. And I'm talking like really detailed drum samples, like round robin, multi velocity, multi layered, like all that. That'd be the very first step. Then I'd go through the album, have the drummer play all the drum parts and record all that. Then I would take those drum samples, put them into my own drum instrument that I would build myself because I was a programmer, so I knew how to do
Right.
that. And then I would go through the album, and if I wanted to make a change, I would just cut that part out and delete it, and then use my drum instrument to replace it. And since it was all recorded in the same time, you would not be able to tell the difference. You couldn't even tell
Wild.
that yeah,
Yeah.
right. But then you do that, and you have 30 days with that band. They go off into tour land or whatever, and then the next band comes in, and now you've got this drum sample instrument that's just sitting on your hard drive. It's not doing anything. I was like, man, I think maybe if I, because I saw some, people selling stuff online, and I was like, I wonder if I could sell these drum samples. I bet people would want it, because people would ask me all the time too, like, how do you get your drum sounds and all this? So I'm like, okay, I'll just sell the instruments, because otherwise they're just sitting on my hard drive collecting dust.
Right.
And the first year, I think we did like, I want to say like maybe $30,000 in sales, and in my mind, I'm like, this is how I scale, because I can't do more than 10 albums a
Yeah.
year.
Right.
It just takes time, and there's no
Hmm.
more time. So you literally hit a ceiling. All you can do is raise your price, but raising your price has its own complexities, because now you push out some people who can't afford you, or XYZ. So I was thinking, okay, I can sell drum samples. So I do that for a while, and that's cool. And then I kind of get bored with it, and also it has its own challenges as well. And then I was on Twitter, and people kept asking me on Twitter, "How do you get your guitar sounds?" So I'm like, well, I actually use this plugin called Pod Farm, and it has a way to save presets. So I can make a preset, send it to you, you open it, you get the exact same sound that I get, as long as you have the right guitar or whatever.
Right.
So I get the idea to start Joey Sturgis tones. So it started out Joey Sturgis drums, then I did Joey Sturgis tones, and I was selling my tones. And then my buddy Nick Sampson, who is actually a an engineer of mine and a producer in his own right, does tons of stuff with Polyphia and Born of Osiris and all kinds of
Mhm.
great bands. Lives in Michigan as well. And yeah, he called me up one day, and he's like, "Hey man, I think you should make a plugin. You've got all these drum samples, you got all these tones, like you should make a plugin." And I was like, "Nah, dude, like I don't even want to even get started with all that. That's like a whole deep rabbit hole that will kill me." And it just kind of ate away at me, and I almost got challenged by it. So I was just like, "Okay, screw it. I am going to make a plugin." Because I had a little bit of time off in between some bands. So sat down, looked into like some different ways of approaching it. Found a way to kind of get started quickly, and worked on a plugin, the very first plugin, which is gain reduction. I worked on
Mhm.
that for like, I don't know, off and on for like 6 months or something. And I was testing it like in my sessions as I was producing these bands. And yeah, I just ended up with a, you know, kind of a great sounding compressor that I was like, I'm kind of into this. I think this sounds like kind of better than what I've been using. And at the time I was using like, waves like C1 and RVox and all those
Mhm.
plugins, right? And
Yeah.
so then uh, I'm like, I think I could probably just put something together in Photoshop, draw a couple knobs, and maybe turn this into a thing that I could just upload on Joey Sturgis Tones, and maybe people will buy it.
Right.
And yeah, so sure enough, did exactly that. And actually, the first version only worked on Windows 32-bit, Cubase 6.5, and that's it.
Oh wow. So
Um,
very specific.
Very
Yeah.
specific. And even then, it still did really, really well. And that's when I knew, okay, I have something to do here. Like I need to find a programmer immediately to help me like port this to Mac. And so I went down that rabbit hole, and that's how the whole thing got started.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? You're working with all these things. And I forgot to mention before, I know that at least from listening to some other podcasts or listening to some other bands that worked with you on podcasts, just like the way you kind of approach some, and I've said this I guess earlier too, the way you kind of approach recording certain things was not kind of as um wasn't as old school, I guess, as some of the other producers that they had worked with. So it makes a lot of sense that you translate from that into making your own plugins. There's a clear trajectory there. I uh, I know you've got different things from the Jeff Loomis one, which that's the one I've heard the most about that people use. I've used the Jason Richardson one personally. I really like that one to throw it in for a couple of recordings I use myself. Um, I did have one random question. I don't know if it was just like a logistical thing, but when it first came out and I used it for quite a bit of time, there was one that you had used a guitar plug-in with Misha Mansour. Is that one still around? Is it still kicking around somewhere, or is it just kind of gone to the internet history a bit?
Yeah, I mean, we discontinued it. It was something that Misha really felt that he wanted to discontinue it, and we respect his right to do that. And
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe he has something up his sleeve. Maybe he wants to go a different direction when it comes to that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, you have to remember these products, they represent people's personal brands. They represent the
Mm,
what the person stands for. And so yeah, you got to respect that kind of stuff. And I would
yeah.
want the same thing for myself if I had made a course that I didn't like, or maybe I liked it at the time, but now I'm like, the information's kind of out of date or whatever, right? I would want to have the right to take it down. So, but I've always tried to approach this kind of thing with like an evergreen mindset. Like, if I make this tool today, how can I make sure that it like is future proof and will work for any musician that ever picks up a guitar? And obviously, you can only do that to a certain extent because
Right.
there's always going to be change.
Hmm.
But I do feel like our products are solution based, and they always have been. It's not about emulating like some magic compressor or whatever. It's more like, let's present a new possible solution to this problem and do it in our own creative way, and then let the creators get creative with those tools and however they see fit. And
Yeah.
I find people mixing drums with Howard Benson vocals, for example, which is like crazy to me, but like it works.
Yeah. Yeah. Going to that Howard Benson one, I was looking at some of the different plugins you have here. That's the one that I don't know what I've liked about the JST stuff is, as I've mentioned before, I'm just kind of an amateur musician in my spare time when I'm not working a decent amount of hours and things of that nature. And what I like about it is it's very like it's very high quality, pretty affordable, and it's also for me like idiot proof. Where like if you're someone like me that, or I'm not a producer by any stretch of the imagination or mixer or anything like that, but I can use it to record well to where I can send it to somebody else that knows what they're doing, which I think is like a huge win because there's people nowadays more than ever, and this is where plugins like yours through this company are probably becoming even more valuable to people as time goes on, as there's so much remote recording now, for people that don't live within a driving distance of a decent studio, or even better, they find somebody that's willing to work with them from across the country that you never, or across the world that you never could have done before without things like this. It's just I don't know. It's really great. I really much appreciate how affordable these things are too. I've noticed for the most part, a lot of the plugins you guys have are a lot more affordable for people. Is that just happenstance that you guys are just have a well-oiled machine that you can do things so cost effectively, or is that kind of something you've shot for with this in a way so that way there's better access to tools for musicians that before could not just afford the hardware, right?
Yeah, well, you have to get creative with how to solve some of the business problems. I mean, one of the business problems of having a plugin company is that things around you change all the time. So as soon as Pro Tools wants to change it from Pro Tools 12 to Pro Tools 13, whatever it is that they do to that change is going to affect you, of course, because if all the users of Pro Tools go to that new version and for some reason or another your plugin doesn't work in that version, or it doesn't work correctly in that version, you've got to fix it. So that those are things that are they require very creative business structures so that you can make sure that you always have somebody there to support your software, to make sure that
Right.
it gets recompiled and all of those kinds of things. So that's part of it. But the other part of it too is just that, like, I think you have the market moving in a certain direction, kind of mostly controlled by some of the bigger guys like Waves and stuff. And so as soon as Waves decides to start putting some of their software for $19 or $29 or whatever, it's kind of like, in order to be competitive, you almost have to follow suit. But if you learn anything about sales and marketing, you know that instantly becomes a race to the bottom, which is just not going to be sustainable. And you get to a certain point now, and I'm kind of glad that everybody's starting to talk about this, because Waves just did a subscription plan, and it's kind of like a taboo topic right now.
Yeah.
But like, you have to understand that from a business point of view, it's fundamentally flawed to sell perpetual licenses, because in order for me to support existing users, I have to go get new users. I have to go get people to buy new licenses in order to have the capital to fund the team to promote or support the existing user base. And what happens when you run out of people? Like,
Right.
so I'm not saying Waves did this right or wrong or any of that. I am just saying that, like, it is a math problem, and eventually it'll hit any business that is in this space. So we're trying to figure out like ways of how that's going to look for us in the future. But at the end of the day, like, you've got to be user focused, because the tools aren't for you at least they're not for me anymore. When I started the company, I made tools for myself, and
Hmm.
other people just so happen to like them as well. But now the tools are for everyone else. So I'm really focused on the user experience, caring about, you know, how can I help users basically remove those barriers so that music creators of all kinds can get closer to their creativity, and those tools help bridge that gap. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, we just focus on trying to make a really good offer at a really good value and at a good price. And that's just been my approach since the beginning.
Well, it has clearly worked out because I feel like I've seen this company in the last couple years just boom. It seems like you're always coming out with new plugins faster than I can even keep keep an eye on. I know just the other day there was even a teaser you guys are doing for another new one through social media. I saw that, which is really cool. Is there anything people can kind of expect from, because I have a lot of kind of gear nerd people that listen to this to some extent. Is there anything people can expect from this company going forward as far as new plugins? Anything you can kind of spill the beans on a bit as far as what you guys are looking at for kind of future endeavors and things of that regard?
Yeah, I mean, we're like you said, we're teasing a plugin now. It's going to be coming out here in the next week or so, and it's something that we've been working on for about 2 years. I'm really proud of the technology that went into this one. You know, it's one thing to take like some existing technology and make it more convenient or more user convenient, but we decided on this next one to be like, okay, we got some ideas for some tech, and we put some time into it, and we want to actually show some new technology. So we're really excited about that. Plus, we're partnered up with somebody that is like a legend in this space. So can't wait for people to find out about that. And all of this will be revealed on our Instagram. So if anybody that's listening wants to get in on the action, just follow Joey Sturgis Tones, and that's where you're going to hear about it first. But yeah, I mean, guitar, you know, I can tell you that the plugin has something to do with guitar, and guitar is an interesting area to solve problems for. And I think that there's been a lot of attempts at figuring out, like, you know, there's like the tone X thing that just came out where it's supposed to be like, okay, we can use like neural networks to like do tone matching and stuff, and that is cool, but you still have to do it like with an ear, because a computer
Right.
doesn't know like what is good and what's not. And even in those scenarios, I still feel like a lot of the stuff that I hear just does not do it. It's just not there. It doesn't have that
Hmm.
metal edge that it needs to have. And so I think that, you know, we have something to offer there, and also some new technology that actually starts to break down some of those variables that you don't have control over. Like, for example, if I make a really awesome guitar tone amp plugin thing, and it sounds awesome when I play through my ESP like 1000, then I send it to you and you plug in your Fender Strat and you're like, "Oh, this thing sounds freaking weird." That's a whole problem now, and
Right.
we have some technology that actually fixes that. And so
Wow.
that's what I'm really excited for people to experiment with, because we've been playing around with it, and it's really incredible what you can do now with this new technology. So yeah, follow us on Instagram and stay tuned.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds good. Thanks for going over that. I'll be excited to see that this upcoming. You said, is that coming out this upcoming week? Is that when the full thing is kind of be rolling out?
Yeah, next week is when you'll literally be able to get your hands on it.
Okay, awesome. Very cool. Thanks for going over that. One last thing, and then I've just got a quick question for you before I let you go that I like to do with some people if we have the time, just for a little fun at the end here. But
Sure.
the other main thing you've been working on, I'm sure I'm missing something else as well, is the URM Academy, Nail the Mix, all those types of things. You're doing that with Al Levy, who've has done his own great work on podcasts, and also his band, which is just crushing when it comes to production and everything else. What was the idea of teaming up there, and what have you kind of seen as a result of that? Have you seen some producers and some people kind of give you good feedback? What's kind of happened with URM and Nail the Mix?
Yeah, so the story there really was, you know, Al had this mission he was on, and it was kind of his own project where he wanted to create a school where people could literally learn how to make records, not like the traditional forms of school, but more like come into the studio, like don't go to a classroom, come into a studio. We're going to literally learn how to make records. And the original idea was to actually be a physical school. And he was partnered with some people that had actually built schools and done things like that. And then we just got talking more and more about it. And our first idea to do together was like, well, let's start a podcast, because we're having these like 3 4 hour phone calls of all these studio stories and like studio techniques. And I'm like, man, I bet people would pay to listen to these conversations. So we launched a podcast, and it did okay. I think we charged like $5 a month to listen to it or whatever. And just the fundamentals of it just didn't make sense, like, because podcasts are now, they're like free most of the time. And so it kind of didn't make sense, and we didn't make a lot of money from that. Not enough for three grown men, I can tell you that. And so sort of the tail end of that first year, I kind of was like thinking about my time at Creative Live, and I was thinking about like how streaming technology has kind of really gotten to a place to where you can literally like jump on a computer and stream yourself. Like I was inspired by people like Notch, who made Minecraft.
Mhm.
He would literally like get on stream and like make Minecraft, and you could watch him code and stuff. I learned like a lot of video game coding techniques from just watching him like stream himself programming.
Right.
I was like, I think if I was sitting here just messing around with a mix, and I was like showing people some of my EQ moves and like how I use plugins and stuff, and I did it on stream, like I bet people would watch that, and I bet people would maybe even pay to see that. So we were like, let's do a free one, and let's see how much people show up, and see if if there's participation and engagement. And if the first one, like, we got like 500 users like right away. And then the second one, I think we got another 500 users, and we were like, okay, we got something going here. So yeah, we turned that into Nail the Mix. And that kind of launched the snowball there of like, okay, now that we have this business and we're doing this every month, you get about 6 7 months in, you're like, okay, is this just going to be the Joey Sturgis, Joel Wanasek, Al Levy mixing show, or
Right.
should we start like bringing other mixers in? And you start flirting around with those different business ideas, and turns into what it is today, right? So and really, it's just fueled by the passion of like realizing your own mortality and your own impact has sort of a window of time. And eventually, the only thing left to do is to pass the torch. So
Right.
we kind of just got ahead of that. It was just like, this is the way this is going to go. I'm not going to make records forever. I mean, I'm not going to be physically able to. So just give people the keys to the castle, let them do what they will with it, right? Like it's kind of
Mhm.
I don't want to be I don't want to leave behind like a this gatekeeper mentality. I want
Right.
to be collaborative, and I think that's where music really shines, is that it's infinite. You can create infinite songs, and it'll never end, and the techniques will keep innovating, and people will keep, music trends will keep changing, and music tastes will keep evolving. And like, so it's this cool thing that like Nail the Mix can be a part of that, almost like historically. It like, pull back the curtains and look behind the scenes and see what's really going into these albums, and how they're made. And so I'm really proud of like helping found and create that. And I hope that other people see it as a, a stair step or a tool to get them from, being interested in it to maybe even doing it full time or building a career out of it. And I think that's kind of like our mission.
Yeah. I was gonna. It definitely seems, more and more people I know that are kind of in the production or studio music realm do bounce a lot of, or get a lot of good things out of it. I think I've been meaning to jump into it myself. I just need to get an updated computer for all of my needs on that. But just even the idea of having all these stems that people can use from certain things that they can really work on, um, one of their favorite songs or a song from a band that they know, and kind of see the difference in like what the different, like you said, whether it's just something as small as EQ levels and what that can look like compared to the final product that the band already has out, or what you can do to kind of make it sound entirely different, all these different things. I think it's a huge tool for people that I think a couple of years ago people would have been dying to have that, right? Like, what up and coming producer doesn't want the stems of like a song that they already love from a producer that they already respect, and then you can kind of see how they got there, right? Like, and you said, it's different than when people go to school for music production. I'm sure people have gotten plenty of good things out of that. I'm not someone that likes to shit on, different education aspects, but I think this is just like the most straightforward way to do it, right? Like it's kind of like the old school way of people would just try to look up everything they could on YouTube back in the day, like a decade ago or so, and you're not sure on the credentials of the person you're watching. You're not sure if it makes any sense. You have no idea how they're getting there. So having it kind of vetted and a more professional, where you've got yourself or Al Levy and some other people that are working on it that are highly acclaimed. I think that's such a useful tool for people. So from that, and then I'll just ask you one more question. Thank you for your time. Before you go, in working through Nail the Mix or working with bands as well, are there things that you've noticed in releases from bands or when you're working with up and coming producers that are just a few simple things that you think either get overlooked by people for the quality of their mixes or songwriting? Just kind of speak to that a bit, I guess, if you can think of just a few things that would benefit people, whether they're up and coming songwriters or up and coming producers.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my answer is probably going to be a little bit more swaying towards the idea of perfection, because I think that's kind of the first place that you can look and make kind of a more of a positive impact as a producer. The drummer is a little bit behind the beat or a little sloppy here and there, and just 3 or 4 small adjustments to that, and you've already made, like, you've improved the song by like 50%.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think people overlook like the quality of the performance, the timing, the pitch, like all those things. Uh, you need a good ear to be able to hear when they're off, and you also need to have a good approach to improving. Like if I'm coaching a vocalist, not going to really say things that I'm careful about what I say, because I want to make sure that I get them to do the right thing, but I don't want to it's not even about hurting their feelings or anything, but you have to word things in a way to get them to know how to do the right take and do it the right way. So I think people overlook how that whole process works, and that's kind of part of what being a good producer is all about, is learning like the language of translation and how to translate ideas into performance and change and actions. That just comes naturally to me for some reason. Maybe it's just my time in the tank, right? Like
Right.
just been doing it for so long that you just kind of figure out like, if I say this, they'll probably get it right. The other thing that a lot of people overlook too is they trust other things too much. Like, I'm very famous for saying I don't trust computers, I don't trust plugins, I don't trust anything. Like, it's all up to you. You control every single note in that computer. You control every single part of that record. So if you're leaving it up to chance for something else, like you're using an automated doubler alignment tool, or you're just letting auto tune everything, or you're using like flex timing to just automatically edit the drums, like you're trusting those tools too much.
Right.
They're there to help you, they're there to guide you, but they can't do the work for you. So at the end of the day, don't overlook your stuff. You're gonna have to do it.
Yeah. I think that's a good lesson, especially this day and age now, where like we've referenced a couple of times, there's so many plugins that can assist. You bring up autotune. There's so many different auto correction or pitch correction tools out there that are fantastic, and those should be utilized. And anyone that says that they're not utilized by near every band are kidding themselves, right? But if it's not a good performance, that's not going to fix that, right? Just like you can throw all the compression, you can throw the right effects, time effects, whatever, on a guitar lead or something as an example. But if it's not a clean playthrough, it's not going to matter. You can only edit so much. You can only fix so much before it whittles down to the basics, which is the recording quality and and the ability of the player or the singer, right?
Yeah.
Like
Not even
it's just boils down
trusting,
to that.
not even trusting their own guitar or their strings, or like I'd have guys come in and be like, oh yeah, this guitar is like perfect, dude. I plug it right in, it's got like a hum in it, or or the battery hasn't been changed in weeks and sounds like crap, like
Yeah.
so I just didn't trust anything. I was just like, I'm gonna check every take, I'm gonna check all the tuning for every little thing that gets recorded. I'm gonna, if I have some sort of analyzer where I can physically diagnose what I'm looking at and what I'm listening to, then I'm going to use that as well. And you uncover
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff all the time. Like you'll see like a 60 hertz bump in the snare mic or some shit. It's like, if you're not paying attention, man, that you're just trusting too much shit, and it's gonna sound bad. you know?
Yeah. Right. That's what it whittles down to, right? Is still focusing on the same things that somebody in some ways focused on when they were making a record in 1960, right? Like the technology has changed. Technology can assist you, but if you don't pay attention to those details and like you said, trust nothing, I guess in a lot of ways, like you can get burned now, just like you could have back then, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, thanks so much for going over this with me, Joey, today. I really appreciate your time. Before I let you go, is there, we've already plugged a few times, Joey Sturgis Tones, URM Academy, Nail the Mix. Is there anything else you want to plug for the people before I let you go? And also one last thing too, I always play music at the very end of this, so you could pick, and if you want to pick the song, that'd be great. If you want to pick the Korean Lighthouse song, if you want to pick a song you've worked on that you're kind of proud of,
Sure.
whatever else as well.
Yeah, nothing else to plug. You kind of nailed it. Just follow us on Instagram. But yeah, the song I would say to play is a song called "Paralyzed" by a band called Conquer Divide, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a song I produced, and it's my wife's band, and I think
Hell
it's a good
yeah.
song. So check it out.
Yeah. Sounds good. We'll play that song from Conquer Divide at the end of this on the Powerless podcast. Again, thanks, Joey, so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
The fault line's about to blow, and the devil is at my throat. Paved with good intentions, don't you know? I'm staring down a dead end road. Please call the doctor, I just saw a piece of me die. I can't stop the bleed. A stream turns to nightmares right before my eyes. Awake or asleep, the gravity pulls me below, and darkness is all that I know. I'm breaking down and I need some room to breathe. Oh, oh, 'cause the weight of this has got me down on my knees. How the hell did I wind up here? Somewhere between all I know and fear. Caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My demons are closer than they appear, and I can't remember the last time that I got out, trapped in a machine. The only way out is if I go straight through it now. I'm disintegrating. I'm breaking down and I need some think I'm better